Hello, company, and welcome to Show People, the podcast that shines a spotlight on the UK performing arts industry and those dedicated to their craft, covering the latest news and issues, what to see and do, showcasing theatrical talent, and always trying to inform, educate, and entertain. My name is Andrew Keats, I'm a director and your host. Today's guest is a world-renowned theatre critic and journalist. He's associate editor and New York theatre critic for The Stage. He's the London theatre critic for londontheatre.co.uk. He's chairman of the drama section of the Critics Circle Awards. He's launched a brand new theatre podcast called Commit No Nuisance with Carl Woodward, and he was former theatre critic for the Sunday Express. But more on that fiasco later. Please welcome Mark Shenton.
Hello, Andrew.
Welcome to the show, Mark.
It's a great pleasure.
Coming live from Mark Shenton's living room, we'll be discussing on today's show. On the Soapbox, we'll be discussing Mark's new professionally made, professionally paid campaign and ask, should actors really get paid? I'll be covering the latest dramatic news. On the platform, we have new music from a new musical called Island Song. And of course, I'll be interviewing Mark Shenton all about his life, career, and setting him some infamous Show People podcast challenges too. You're listening to the Show People podcast with Andrew Keats and Mark Shenton. Thank you so much for coming on, Mark.
It's a great pleasure. I feel I've known you for years. And
you
of course,
have?
I'm a huge fan of yours as well, not least because you directed a great production of one of my favourite all-time musicals, The Hired Man, by the great Howard Goodall.
That means a lot to me, because you championed me, I think, from when I was 23. And I think I said this to you at the time.
That's about 30 years ago, isn't it?
Don't you dare mistake me for Tom Sutherland. No, I remember saying to you, I think when I met you for the first time, because I was a bit starstruck. Because when I was at drama school, I was one of the kids who was a geek. I'm a little bit like you, live, breathe, sleep, eat theatre.
Yeah.
And you were my critic. And I remember trying to reconcile quite often when you would see something and you didn't like it and I would love it. And just be like, well, what am I getting wrong? If Shenton says it's terrible, it has to be
But
terrible.
that's not how theatre reviewing works, of course.
I was very young.
Yeah, I mean, I always think that there's no right and wrong when it comes to theatre reviewing. We are just an opinion, hopefully an informed one, and hopefully we can back up our opinions. But I mean, I often use, for example, my favourite critic is Susanna Clapp in The Observer. And when she's loved something that I've not liked, I've really doubted myself. And I've even gone back to see it a second time. Because I think if Susanna likes this, then there must be something wrong with me.
We tend to be very much aligned, but I do remember, and I'll say publicly, and thank you, because I think it was from your early reviews of Bent, which is probably the first thing I ever did, that actually, thanks to you and being a critic, put me on the map.
Yeah, I mean that of course is another one of those great plays, the Martin Sherman play that. I remember that I mean, obviously, I saw the original production. I'm afraid I'm old enough. It was one of the first plays I ever saw in London. It was 1979 at the Royal Court with Ian McKellen and Tom Bell. And as a 16-year-old, so I've just given away my age, at that time, this play had, and I wasn't an out gay man at all, but it had a shattering impact on me, that play. And of course, it taught me a bit of our history that I didn't know. I didn't know that gay men too suffered persecution and murder in the Nazi regime. And so it was an incredible act of reclamation, that play. And since then, of course, I've seen every revival going, including yours, which was at the Landor, a fantastic now no longer there theatre in Clapham. But you did a lot of productions there, and I used to love that little space.
And do you know what? We're going to talk about this on the Soapbox later, but, I think it's very, very important people remember that, yes, with the professionally made, professionally paid campaign, I'm seeing a lot of people who perhaps don't know how much of a theatrical soldier you've been over the years and how supportive you've been of the Fringe. And again, we'll go into detail about it. But personally, I owe you a very great deal. So you were top of my list of people I wanted to bring on here. And rather excitingly, following suit, you two have a podcast.
I do now. Now, of course, I think the podcasts are the way of the theatre future, or one of the ways. I mean, we're seeing a complete stripping away of print, print as it used to exist, reading it in print. That no longer barely exists anymore. I mean, interestingly, the New York Times, which is one of the great newspapers of the world, they recently reported that they now have over $1 billion worth of subscription revenue, and that's for their online portals. And you go in New York and you can hardly find a copy of the New York Times anymore, the print copy. Everyone's reading everything online. So print is a way of the past, but podcasts, people seem to love them. And with that in mind, a friend, Carl Woodward, and I have set up a podcast. We're now on episode 5. We're about to record episode 6. And it's been a lot of fun so far. It's a much freer form and a much more informal form of reporting about the theatre. You can have a lot of fun with it, and I think we do. And the tone is serious but irreverent. So we have a weekly fiasco of the week and those sorts of things. And Carl is much younger than me, so we have a clash of a difference in experience. And one of the things we do every week is I teach him about a weekly musical, because his musicals knowledge is poor. So I've taught him about the Higher Band. In fact, that's one of the shows we've highlighted. And actually,
it was Day Follows Day, wasn't it?
Yes,
you played.
Indeed.
Just to show proof I do listen.
Yes, you do. And that's a brilliant new song that wasn't in your version, was it?
Yes, it was.
It was. Oh, because
it was only added for Salisbury.
That's right. Yes, exactly. We're such geeks on this.
Yeah, well, Howard Goodall. Yeah, quite rightly.
So musical theatre matters enormously to me. It's my favourite thing in the world. And actually it ties in with another part of my life, which you haven't mentioned in the intro, which is that I teach at Arts Ed.
You do?
And teaching at Arts Ed is a really important part of my life now, because I teach the first year musical theatre students, and basically I teach them, I say irreverently, I teach them the musicals before Legally Blonde and Wicked. Many of them do know that already, but I will play them songs from Pippin. I will play them Barbara Cook endlessly. I'll play them Audrey MacDonald endlessly, because these
How do I subscribe? I'll come along.
These are important figures in musical theatre history. I mean, Barbara died last year. She's probably, I think, the greatest singer of my lifetime. And just keeping that legacy alive and among this new generation of people who won't have heard of her otherwise is really, really important.
I think it's also, again, and I can talk about this because, of course, I am not you, but certainly as a young director growing up, to hear a respected, printed, published journalist before the days of, WordPress and things, talking about musical theatre as an art form, that was really helpful. That was really inspiring for me, because you do doubt it, because like the other day I was listening to Hello Dolly as I did the housework, quite a common occurrence, and yet I'm listening to these lyrics and going, this is poetry. This is poetry with a scintillating score. This is brilliant. But the skill and craft and creating musicals and having a proper, and I say proper journalist, when there were very few journalists, even then, respecting our art form was really helpful and really championed a lot of people. And I think there's a lot of people out there who owe you a very great deal for traipsing up and down fringe venues and sitting in, well, your health is already proving, sitting in terrible theatre seats for most of your life.
Yeah. I mean, I have a genetic predisposition to having a bad back, which, I went to see my back surgeon only the other week, and he said to me, blame your parents. So it actually comes from that. But I blame my parents and also blame sitting in bad theatre seats. I sit in bad theatre seats between 6 and 12 times a week. Yeah. And these are seats, by and large, that you can't control. You can't control what seat you're given. And most theatres have lousy seats. I mean, the Royal Court and the National are among the few theatres that have decent seats to sit in. And it does take its toll. I mean, most regular people will sit in a theatre seat maybe twice a week, or once a month or twice a month, maybe. I sit in them 7 nights a week, roughly.
As Howard Goodall wrote you that pastiche musical,
yes,
My Life in Dark Rooms.
I know, double meaning there, I think. But yes, and that was a glorious tribute. I mean, it was Howard and his lyricist partner Charles Hart. They wrote this one song from a potential musical of the future. It was an April Fool's joke, in fact, and that it was spun off from an April Fool's joke when the stage did a thing saying that my life was going to be turned into a musical, and then Howard actually wrote that musical. So rather hilarious.
He's extraordinary. I mean, do you know what? We could spend 2 hours just talking about. I could talk 2 hours just about Love Story alone, let alone The Hired Man, let alone A Winter's Tale. There are he is. I mean, I know you have, similar to me, just above my head, you have a piece of original manuscript.
Yes, this is a bit of The Hired Man that Howard gave me for my wedding, a bit of the original score of it, which was gorgeous. And now, regarding, you just mentioned Love Story, for my wedding, we got married in New York, my husband and I, and then when we came back to London, we did a party for our London friends, and I decided we'd have a little cabaret, because it's a theatre event.
And you're an enormous homosexual, yes.
Exactly. And so I wanted to have, I asked Emma Williams and Michael Xavier, who had starred in the original London production of Love Story, to come and sing some songs from Love Story at my party. And of course they both agreed, which was lovely. And then Emma said, "Who's going to play for us?" And I said, "Well, I'll ask Howard." and Howard did come and play for us.
He's quite a good rehearsal pianist, I find.
Not bad.
Do you know what he did for us? Again, I'm totally off tangent, but hell. I remember the first time I brought the cast for the first professional revamped version of A Winter's Tale. And we brought the whole cast, Frafi and etc., all Pete Gallagher, all of Christopher Blades, all of us were in Faber Music upstairs in that wonderful rehearsal suite. And Howard said, well, I thought what we'd do is I'll do a sing-through of the show. And I said, well, the cast won't know it. I said, well, I'll bring a sound system. And he went, oh, no. He said, just come to Faber's and I'll look after it. I said, all right. Cast arrived. Everyone's there. Howard comes in with his wife, Val, and what was Puppy then. And Howard sits himself at the piano, plays the entire score, sings it from start to finish. It is one of the most wonderful experiences. And then afterwards stood up, and the sound of the cast going mad. It was like a private concert with Howard.
I know, with one of the greatest composers of my lifetime. I think he is the greatest melodist working in British theatre or music, period. And the other day I posted that on Facebook, actually, that Howard's the greatest melodist. And Jeremy Sams, who knows his stuff. Jeremy is a brilliant director, musician himself, and all-round genius of the theatre. He posted a reply saying he agreed that Howard is the greatest melodist we have.
He has a beautiful understanding of two things, especially. One is love in the purest form, and the second is childhood. Yes. And do you know what? The show I did recently, because you were going to come all the way to come and see it, but sadly, 7 hours journey. But I got asked by the Cumbria Institute of the Arts whether I would do Girlfriends,
which is another favourite show. The score is wonderful. The book does not work at all.
Well, we did work a little bit on it, and I need to send Howard our version.
The score is glorious.
I tell you, Howard kindly sent me, I think you probably have the same thing, the old recordings from when it was done with Maria Friedman.
Yes.
And I tell you what, in the voices of 17 to 22-year-old girls,
yes,
who, they're all Cumbrian. In fact, I know a lot of them listen to the podcast, so hi, University of Cumbria / UCUM, as they call it. They were so moved by his work. And we're talking about kids that listen to, Stephen Schwartz and Lloyd Webber most of the time. They'd never come across it. And I remember all the hairs on my arm have gone up. And the first time they sang through that extraordinary finale, all 19 minutes of it, the tears in these young people's eyes that were moved by what he had written was extraordinary.
It is an extraordinary score, that. And when you mentioned the young people music, The Dreaming is another one of my favourite shows, based on A Midsummer Night's Dream. And that was written for a youth company. And in fact, it was originally premiered by National Youth Music Theatre.
Yes.
And is simply glorious.
There's, Howard, I'm very fortunate to have as a patron of Arian Productions as well, which is wonderful. And I'm sure it won't be long before I drag another show back. I'm quite tempted to do a Howard Goodall review, because I did see one.
The
one at Rose and Crown.
Rose and Crown, of course.
All the way to Walthamstow.
Yes.
But I remember seeing it and going, what a lovely tribute to him. But I also remember going, maybe we could come up with something.
Of course, that's ourselves. The thing, is that the artistic director up there is also, like us,
a
huge fan.
Aaron.
And there's another person who runs the theatre in Lincoln, who also does an annual musical, Howard Goodall musical, as his community production. And in the last couple of years, I went to see they did The Hired Man, and the next year they did The Dreaming, I think. So glorious, glorious stuff.
Well, I must get Howard on this, and hopefully Howard and I will spend 20 minutes talking about how wonderful your work is. Before we continue and delve into your life and career, it's time for a Show People podcast challenge.
Okay.
Now, ordinarily, I would challenge the various performers that come on the show to remember their CV in 1 minute. Now, my first thought was, he will fucking kill me if I get him to do that. And my second thought was, well, you've dedicated years of your life. I mean, 11 and a half years with the Sunday Express, for example. Yeah. And I thought, actually, you could sum up your CV in a minute easily because of the years that you've worked at organisations.
Although, actually, the interesting thing about that is that to say about the Sunday Express, that was in parallel with other things, because I've always had a diverse career. I mean, I've always done multiple things all at once, because the trouble with this game, and it's increasingly the case, is that you can't earn a living from one of them. With the 11 and a half years I spent on the Sunday Express, I could not have lived on what they paid me. So I was also doing the stage at that point. I've been writing a daily column for the stage since 2005. So an online column. I was one of the first bloggers out there who got paid to do it for the stage. So I did that for 12 years consecutively. I'm now reduced to twice a week rather than 5 days a week, which is much easier. But so the Sunday Express was for 11 and a half years, the stage since 2005 full as a regular. I've also been teaching at Arts Ed for the last 6 years. And I also, in the past, I've had jobs at De Winters. I was their publishing editor for their programs and brochures. And I also spent about 10 years at the PA, Press Association, in charge of their arts and entertainment listings.
I've socialised with you as well as you've reviewed my work, and that's always a fascinating, thing. Where I have friends who are critics and they come and see your work. Fortunately, you've always been very, very kind and enjoyed the stuff I've done, bar one thing, but we won't talk about that.
What was the show I didn't like?
You didn't like Rooms of Rock Romance.
Oh, okay.
With Cassidy Jansen. You did not like it.
I did not like it, no.
You did not. And Lynn Gardner liked it even less. But that's okay. That's okay. I don't have a bugbear about that.
And actually, that is the truth. The truth is that I do have to separate my compartmentalize my life a bit, because frankly, my opinion is not worth anything if I give things a pass. I don't think there's anything such thing as true objectivity when it comes to reviewing, because I think it's always a matter of opinion. But if I have to speak my own truth, because otherwise there's no point.
My mind boggles how many millions, it must be millions of hours that you have spent taking in proper theatre. And
now, I have to say that one of the things, and I freely admit this myself, I'm an addict. I'm an addict personality. I'm an addict of sugar. I'm an addict of coffee. I'm an addict of theatre. I do go to excess. I mean, to do my job, most critics, to do their job, go to the theatre between 3 and 5 times a week. I go up to 12. I've been known to go up to 12. Now, a lot of those aren't purely for work. I mean, because I'm a serial repeater. Howard Doodle in particular, Bend It Like Beckham, I think I used to go every week during its run. And in fact, Lynn Gardner from the Guardian once said, "What do you do for pleasure? What's your leisure time activity?"
It's one of my questions later, yeah.
And I said, for pleasure, I go and see Bend It Like Beckham.
Hi, this is John Barr, and you're listening to the Show People podcast with Andrew Keats.
Mark Shenton, I have collected some outrageous reviews. I'm going to read a short quote from each of these reviews. I want you to tell me if you can guess who wrote it and whether or not you think it's harsh or fair. Mark Shenton, let's play Harsh or Fair. Before I went into the show, I was pondering lyric-based puns I could use in this review. Afterwards, I decided to leave them out. Dusty Springfield has suffered enough.
Not really fair. I don't think you should pre-write your reviews ever.
That was Tom Wicker on Dusty at the Charing Cross. Oh, this is brilliant. Loved the shoes. Loathed the show. Okay, I exaggerate. I didn't like the shoes all that much. But the wheel-heeled footwear known as merblades, which allow stage-bound dancers to simulate gliding underwater, provides the only remotely graceful elements in the musical blunderbuss called Disney's The Little Mermaid.
That's very fair. I saw the show.
Can you guess who wrote it?
New York Times?
Yes. Ben Bradley.
Ben Bradley.
Very good. Shine is a genuinely enjoyable finale to Act 1. Fans of Take That will have a good time. Theatre makes the people come together. Some of the scene transitions and set are genuinely inventive. The female cast members are not awful. So there we go.
Well, actually, if it's the band, if it's a review of the band, I actually quite like the band. But it's very well written. I thought it was a good line.
Who do you think wrote the review?
I have no idea.
Carl Woodward.
Oh, well, interestingly, because he hated that show from the get-go.
This is brilliant. A small load of theatrical rubbish, otherwise known as a black farcical comedy by Maurice Panch, was dumped in the prettiest of West End theatres last night. Hundreds of innocent playgoers were caught up in the unsung, noxious mess. For a full, not to say bloated 90 minutes, the audience was subjected to the spectacle of the stand-up comedian Alan Davies. Going back a bit.
I think I saw that.
It's Auntie and Me.
Oh, yes, I did see it. And is that Lynn Gardner?
No, it's Nicholas de Jong.
Oh, yes.
Do you want me to do another one?
Yes.
Hamilton is no revolution, but if you wait until the promotional frenzy has abated, and if you lower your expectations to those for a normal West End show, you should enjoy it well enough.
Quentin Letts?
Yes,
Yes.
Quentin Letts, 3 stars on Hamilton. One more. As a London-based Asian female doctor boards a British Airways flight to India to attend a family wedding, she tells us how much she loves Bollywood. It teaches you to have hope, she says. I can only say that this lackluster and messy Bollywood-inspired musical pageant soon drained me of all hope.
Sam Marlowe?
It's you.
Me? Well, Sam Marlowe and I saw that together at Watford, and we took the train back in mutual pain. But yes, so that was so interesting that I thought it was her when in fact it was me. Yes.
Very good. Well, listeners, we're going to continue talking to Mark actually about his new professionally made, professionally paid campaign, which I'm really, really interested to talk to him about because we have both got different sides to this argument, and I'm really, really excited to ask him about it. Why don't you tell me some of the worst reviews you've ever had? Join the Show People Podcast Listeners Forum at facebook.com/Show People Podcast. Let's hear the very worst reviews you've ever come across, and I want to know if you think they're harsh or fair.
Hello, my dears. You have the ineffable and probably undeserved pleasure of listening to the Show People Podcast with Andrew Keats. This is Stephen Fry wishing you a wonderful listen. Thank you.
Well, it's time for the Soapbox, the part of the show where we discuss an industry issue. And today, we're talking about Mark's decision to stop reviewing shows where actors are not paid, specifically stating the following in his blog at thestage.co.uk. By going to review work at venues where actors are not paid, or paid very little, I'm effectively endorsing a system that advantages some at the expense of others. So now I'm making a personal commitment not to review shows for which actors and other participants are not paid unless they're in a collaborative, non-hierarchical venture. An individual or group of friends who collaborate on a show together make their own decisions to do so. The moment they hold auditions, they're holding a job interview. The same applies to arts journalism. I will only read reviews and features written by people who are paid to write them. So, Mark, this went out through Twitter to begin with, 240 characters, and how many retweets did you get?
It had something like over 5,000 likes and about 1,000 comments and retweets. It did go crazy. What was important for me was finally, after years, I've been debating this internally with myself and with other people for years, because there is an element in which the system, which is clearly broken at this point, around actors and paying on the fringe, where we are part of that system. And early on, I remember having this argument with somebody who said that I should not be reviewing, an actor who said I should not be reviewing fringe shows. And I said, are you seriously saying they should be twice punished? They're not going to be paid and they're not going to be reviewed either, because doing it and getting reviewed is part of the payoff and the reward for not working for free. And then I decided, and it just hit me like a bolt out of the blue, that somebody had to take a stand on this. That the system would never change unless somebody took a stand. Now, I'm not saying that I alone am going to effect that change. Other people will continue to review those shows, and I'm fine by that. I just do not want to do that. And the truth is, I don't consider myself that important that what I do will make that big change happen. But I do think that I can hold my head up high and say, no, enough is enough. Because I see, just through my own eyes, I see people who are living off the proceeds of these productions. And running theatres where they're not paying people, and they're running these theatres profitably, managing to take foreign holidays. Now, of course, they should have a salary from doing that, running that thing, because unlike the actors who appear there, the actors do 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, and they can go on and do other paid jobs. These people who run these venues, that's the only job they do. So I realise they have to take something. But it seems to me that there is an exploitative system at play here. And yes, I realize that that's going to prejudice actors who are not being paid not to be reviewed either. But that's no longer my responsibility. The only responsibility that I can take is not to go. And as it is, I mean, frankly, if you look at the average week between London, the Fringe, and the regions, because of course I cover in the regions as well,
And New York.
there are roughly 25 shows a week that you can choose from. So if I can't go to the Landor, which I can't do anyway because it's not there anymore, then so be it. And in fact, I've given myself a much harder job in some ways, because now when I choose to review something, I have to find out the facts. Are these people being paid? And it's interesting that the very week I invoked this rule for myself, I'm just saying it's not a rule for the stage, it's not a rule for anybody else. That very week, Pippin was transferring from Hope Mill Theatre, where I'd reviewed it, to Southwark Playhouse. And Pippin is one of my favourite musicals of all time, and I loved this production in Manchester, and I know they paid people in Manchester. But I had to make the inquiry as to whether they were paying in London. And the thought occurred to me, oh my God, I may not be able to go and see this show now.
Yeah.
And I made the inquiry. I was told that they were not paying per the commercial equity agreement, but they were paying per the Fringe agreement. And I actually also then checked with Equity to verify this. So I had to do the legwork to find out that it was okay to review it.
So the other thing I want to talk about, because as we said at the beginning of the show, because of course I know there's going to be people listening to this, and it's not a hard argument saying to an actor, do you think you should be paid? It's not a hard argument at all. I defy any actor that's going to go, no, I don't need to live, I don't need to pay my rent.
Yeah.
But I'll take it from my position when I was 23, starting out. Young director, no understanding of the Arts Council system, certainly no connections to anybody with money. Look, I'm a kid from a council estate in Bournemouth. I just talk very nicely. When I came to London, all I wanted to do was put Bent on. Bent are all of us, and this is what and admittedly you do say this in your statement, that a non-hierarchical value. None of us were getting paid. Me as a director wasn't getting paid. I did audition those actors, but I was also a new director who didn't know the talent in London. And I certainly knew that I was professional enough to seek out the right actor for the right job. And I remember, and this is gospel truth, I was with, funny enough, me and that cast got together only a few weeks ago. We're still in touch. And I remember there was a scene with when Uncle Freddie is sat on the bench, and in my mind I knew exactly what I wanted. There was a magazine, a particular magazine I wanted, which had a beautiful woman on the front cover. It was a German magazine. And on the inside front was a picture of Hitler as he turned the page. Just a lovely little moment I wanted. Couldn't get high resolution enough image to recreate it. Anyway, long story short, I ordered 2 copies, because of course actors ruin props, especially if they're made of paper. I ordered these 2 things off eBay. I think they were £17. And I think my overdraft had about £18 left to it. And I got those 2 magazines. I walked home from the Landor, because I certainly couldn't afford tubes. And where I lived in Brixton, tiny little grubby flat in Brixton, there was a Sainsbury's, and it was the days when they would put the skips outside the front of Sainsbury's. And I opened it up and I managed to find 2 loaves of bread that weren't stale. They'd just gone past their best before date. And rather shockingly, some coated chicken pieces. And that was going to be my dinner for that week, because I wanted to get that production on. Now, of course, being an inexperienced young producer, I think I walked away from that production personally with $7,000 debt, which is a hell of a lot when you're 23, a hell of a lot of money. But what did I get in exchange? In exchange, I had my favourite theatre critic championing me. I had a group of actors that we've gone on to work with time and time again, and I had to pay that. But I think most of those actors were unrepresented. They then became represented. I then built a relationship with the Landor, and so on and so on and so forth. And my fear is I just enjoyed so much from the support you gave me there. My concern is, A, are you going to lose out on the one thing you love most of all, which is exciting, dynamic, new talent and theatre? And secondly, and this is taking your I'm going to call it charity, because, you know, you don't get paid a lot of the time to review some of these things. You do it out of just your time and effort. My concern is you're going to lose out, and actually a younger generation, thanks to your generosity of your time, are also going to lose out. Sorry, speech over.
No, I absolutely realise that. I realise that there is a downside to this. And actually, one of the things I've committed to is not reviewing these shows. That doesn't mean I can't see them. So I could still go to a production at the Union and support it in other ways, but not review it. I'm just not going to give it the oxygen of publicity in that way. And so I could still talent spot. I could still do that. Having said that, I find personally problematic that I would be I wouldn't want to take a comp from them, but I also don't want to pay them, because if they're not paying their actors, I don't. The trouble with a lot of these productions, and this has been well documented, is that the director, the designer, the producer gets a fee, but the actors don't, and that happens again and again. So I'm reluctant to part with money at the box office. Money that, by the way, I don't have either, because producers aren't paid very much.
You're a theatre critic.
Yes. So yes, there will be losses, and I will lose out. But you know what? There are plenty of places for me to see theatre and to see young talent. For instance, I teach at ArtsEd. I see those talent in their student shows. I can still go and see student shows. And one of the things I wrote in my column, which in fact caused the most controversy of all, was that I said that perhaps the workaround for these theatres would be for them to redesignate themselves as amateur houses, and then they could, first of all, save the money because they do the shows under amateur licenses, which are cheaper than professional licenses.
No, they're not. That's a misconception. No, it's quite the opposite. Amateur licenses are vastly more than professional.
Okay, well then I stand corrected.
That really is the case. No. Ask any drama school. Ask any drama school, because of course, if you're doing a nice play and you've got your 5% royalty a night or 75 quid per show, whatever the most is, compared to an amateur license, you're dealing with, like when, for example, I don't know, the Guildford Amateur Dramatic Society does it, they'll pay £400-600
for the run.
No, per
show,
because of course they're only going to do 3 shows.
Yes.
So of course these amateur, and obviously it could damage the brand of the show, of course. So it's amateur blazing.
Yes,
to protect them and the brand of the writers.
Yes,
but also the per performance cost is a lot higher, because we looked at it when we were doing at the Landor. That was my instinct. It was, let's just be an amateur house, because this argument has come around. I said, well, let's just call it an amateur production. All the drama schools do, but it would have cost us so much more in rights.
But I think the thing about amateur is obviously it's a pejorative term, or it seems to be a pejorative term when actors want to be seen as professional. Yeah. So I understand why there was a pushback on that. But you know, for instance, the thing that bugs me as well about this whole argument is that there are playwrights who also aren't paid, by the way, in all of this, but they get the production on at the Finborough or wherever it might be, and then that play is published, and then they might get a royalty from the book publishing. But more than that, they get the reviews, which then go on the back of the play script, and they also then get subsequent productions. So ultimately, the writer will make money from their play in a way that the cast will never make money from it. And in fact, what will happen very often, or does happen, is a play that they'll work on at the Fringe will then transfer to the West End, and they'll be replaced for the West End. So that's another downside. So you know, I think there's so many problems. I don't think it's cut and dried. I mean, I have made a cut and dried decision, but that's based on my own morality, and I don't think there's a right answer to this particularly.
No, and I think this is the other thing, isn't it? I mean, so many people are looking to you quite fairly, because, and indeed I've heard stories from yourself and others where you've been stopped in the street and actors have shaken your hand and gone, thank you. But I think the other concern that I've got, and again I don't have an answer, probably as you won't have an answer, but we're now kicking up this nest of vipers that comes with it. It could encourage producers to pay less on the Fringe.
There is that argument, but I don't think that's going to actually.
Because, for example, most shows and the other question is, well, how much do you pay? So, for example, I think on average, in my earlier days, yes, we certainly did profit share, and everybody was doing profit share. And of course, I don't have the bank of mum and dad. My mum takes me to Lidl when I go back home. But the thing that is interesting as well, is 250 quid a week enough? Is 350 quid a week? Is 150 quid a week?
Well, there's a legal minimum wage. Now we have legislation for this, and it's by the hour, and there's how much you should be paid. Equity have got a fringe agreement now, which specifies a certain amount, and we're not saying that that's the right amount. I think it's extremely unlikely that producers are going to pay more than the minimums.
We did. We did, because my co-founder of Arian Productions, Andrew Harmer, and I, it was very important to us that when working out the profit shares, particularly in the likes of Trafalgar Studios, and all the money you can lose there, and 13 grand comes to mind.
Yeah.
Like, it was important to us to do favoured nations that everybody, whether you're the lead or like Cynthia Erivo, for example, whether you were Cynthia Erivo or you're one of the chorus members, all got, I think it was 250 quid a week. But you look at the budgeting of renting an ATG venue, plus the cast wages, which I think there was, 17 or so. Mm. There is a potential to make profit. There really, and you'll know this as a producer, which we'll get onto later. Yeah. But when it loses because those 2 weeks...
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the other things I often have said, is that when producers produce a show, they are taking all the risk. You're signing up to pay that rental, signing up to pay that production cost, etc., etc. So... and the actors sign up for no risk. I mean, there's profit share, but there's no loss share. So if nobody walks through the door, then the producer is going to pay everything. So I think the producer should earn a little bit more because they've taken all the risk. So I think that when you have a profit in the old model of an old profit share, of course the producer should take a little bit more because he or she has taken all the risk.
I don't think we ever took any. I mean, we never paid ourselves a fee because any money we had, we wanted to give to the actors. Yeah. But do you know what? This is right. It's not helpful because I'm making it personal rather than about. I think my principle, and I think my concern is this. All of the very good, kind, brilliant producers that I know that have started or continue to work on the fringe, I know are not making a profit. I just know they're not. But I think, and this is only my opinion, I am frightened of it being producers and directors because I think it will demonise the very people who love actors most of all, especially directors. I think the problem is with the venues.
And that argument has been put to me. Very often they're one and the same. The venues are producing venues, and that's where the problem starts. And I know that when I produced a show on the Fringe, which I did as an exercise in just trying to see how it works.
At the Cock, wasn't it?
At the Cock Tavern, yes. And one of the things this is going back 7-8 years, probably. It was a friend of mine who wrote a play, Charlotte Eilenberg. She asked me where she should send it to. I suggested the Cock Tavern. She sent it to the Cock Tavern. They then, who I knew the people there, and they said, well, why don't you produce it? And I'd never thought of producing it. And I thought, well, this would be an interesting experience. And one of the things I did on that production was I immediately raised money from people I knew, benefactors, not investors, benefactors, because they weren't going to get their money back, to pay for it was a two-hander, and I wanted to pay for 2 professional actors to up the casting ante, because the show would be best served by 2 actors who were being paid, who were professional actors. We got 2 fantastic actors. We actually employed a professional casting director to do it, to get us our actors. We got the brilliant Jack Claff and the brilliant Amanda Ryan. Now, the money I raised was for 3 weeks rehearsal and 4-week run to pay them each £500 a week, which was obviously it's above
extraordinarily generous at the Cock. 40, 50 seats, smallest theatre in London, wasn't it?
One of. Yeah. So that was £7,000. Right, so and quite a big chunk of money to raise. And however, what I didn't do, and I've now learned this important lesson, the thing I didn't do was I didn't raise money to. The director was the husband of the playwright, so he was doing it as a favour. He's a BBC director, and he took time out of his holiday time to do it. He's already got a full-time salary. He's fine with that. The playwright didn't need it. Well, she just wanted a play on, so she didn't need a fee. But the people we left out of getting a fee, which is really crucial, is stage management. So, for instance, every single night there were a lot of sound and lighting cues in the show, and not every single night, but many nights we had a different operator on the sound and lighting desk, and the lighting and sound cues got screwed up a lot. And part of me afterwards, the lesson learnt was I should have been paying that person because that person was also equally important. So a lesson learned.
Yeah.
And that was my own naivety. But the thing is, the truth is that if you're putting a play on the Cock Tavern with 50 seats, how are you going to pay everybody?
And a theatre that I know you love. In fact, I had a wonderful quote from you I read, which I hadn't come across before when I was doing my research about the Union, for example. I think you said, where is
the National Theatre of Musicals, that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, there was a lovely line, which was, even my words are on the walls.
Yes.
And I know, because again, I think people on Twitter do demonize you a bit, Mark, quite unfairly. And I think, I know you love these places.
And I know one of the things, I mean, I'm very aware of this. We're entering into a very different world at the moment, and this is actually a slightly troubling consequence, I think, partly of Trump, is that we all feel so powerless now with this monster in the White House that there's a pushback, and now everybody's being demonized, everybody across the board. Now, having said that my low pay, no pay, fair wage campaign has had overwhelmingly positive support. I would say 95% people have been supportive and maybe 5% haven't.
And also, I felt for you a little bit. I really felt for you a little bit, especially when people weren't reading the entirety of what you said. The non-hierarchical ventures part is very much there. You haven't said, I'm not reviewing stuff on the Fringe.
No.
You've also said, which quite rightly, you said, I'm not stopping work on the Fringe, I'm just not reviewing it.
Yes.
Which is, again, I really felt for you there because
I mean I've lived through these social media wars enough now
daily.
to know it. I have to say it wears you down because it is exhausting, and there are also people who expect a level of engagement which is unreasonable because they engage you. I mean, there's one person sent 15 consecutive tweets and 3 days later sent them all again because I had not responded, and frankly, I was getting so many messages, I had to say, no, hold on, I can't respond to everybody. I mean, it was a full-time job to respond to everybody. Stephen Fry with 5 million followers once upon a time, how do you engage with all that level of people?
I was just going to quote Stephen, because for your sanity, and again, we'll talk about your struggles with depression and your championing of mental health later. Stephen said something to me, because I asked him the same thing. I was like, how do you cope? And obviously, the first thing, Stephen doesn't read newspapers.
Yes.
Because he doesn't believe them. But the one thing he said is never read below the line.
No, I know, they always say that. And absolutely. And one of the things perhaps not to do is, although they tell you on Twitter you should be engaging, and that's the point of Twitter, is that you engage with your followers, I'm actually seriously thinking of deleting my mentions column, because then I don't see what people are saying. It's just going to be easier. I don't want to silence them, but it's just exhausting. But what I was going to say as well is the responsibility of, the demonization is that, yes, I do have a voice, and I have a loud voice, possibly because I have a lot of followers. And with that comes responsibility. I mean, I've always said that this job, if you give criticism, you should be able to take it too. And I accept that. And I've got 40,000 plus followers. So there is some responsibility to that. But at the same time, it's not my job. I don't do Twitter as a job. I'm not paid for it. No. So I have to ration it. And one of the things I've recently done, actually, is I've declared a Twitter detox where I now only check in 4 times a day. I check in first thing in the morning, I check in at lunchtime, I check in at 5 or 6 o'clock, and I check in at 11 o'clock before I go to bed.
I bet the 11 o'clock one's the deadliest one, because that's when America's sort of coming alive. And my other half has a go at me, because I'll just go, I'm just going to check my phone. 3 o'clock in the morning, you can find that screen still in your face. And it's terrifying.
And the truth is as well that actually engaging with followers and responding very fast to them is not a good idea, because if you engage very fast, then it sets up a conversation. If 5 hours have gone by and they haven't had a response, they've moved on to another target by then. So it's better to allow time to pass before responding, if you need to respond at all. I think a lot of the times you don't need to respond.
Well, then you remind me of a quote by Tom Lehrer, which I quite like, where Tom Lehrer said, "Life is like a sewer. What you put into it, you pretty much get out of it." Well, Twitter's a bit similar.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask you one last thing. Just explain, for the emerging theatre companies out there that respect you like I did when I was 23, and still now, if they've got no money and they want to put on a Fringe production, you're not saying you won't support it and you won't review it because it's non-hierarchical. So you'd be happy to go and support that work or go and see it if you had time in your schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things to say as well is that, given that I've also already said that there are 25 roughly shows a week to choose from to review, I'm not going to get to everything anyway. Just because you put it on doesn't mean I'm going to come.
Sure.
But what I'm saying is that I'm definitely not going to go if I know that you're not paying people and you're a hierarchical venture. I've made that decision.
Yeah,
that's my decision to make. Just as I stated it publicly. I could have done it silently. I could have, and probably should have done it silently.
No,
but I think it's far fairer to the world, for the world. And I'm glad I made the stand, because Equity have been fighting this battle for a long time now. They have a fringe organizer, this is a major campaigning point for them, and I'm fully supportive of it. Professionally made, professionally paid says it all to me. Their hashtag is brilliant.
If not sort of one too many characters. There must be
yes.
It's sort of like there's no space to talk about anything else.
Yeah.
Maybe they did that on purpose. Who knows? And the other thing I'm going to ask, so, and you're basically saying as long as people on the fringe, just talking about the fringe, I mean the true fringe, I'm not talking, God, we could get into the various definitions of off-West End, off-Broadway nonsense, but let's not go down there. But talking about things like the wonderful Finborough, the Union, etc. Sorry, the etc. is a theatre, of course, as well.
Yes.
The etc. etc.
Which I've only been to once in my life.
No, me too. I think I've been as well. I think it's because it's always the last on the list.
Yeah.
But with those, as long as people are fulfilling the minimum wage requirements as set out by the Equity Fringe Agreement,
yes,
then you're happy.
And here's the thing: the Hope Theatre in Islington is a 50-seater theatre as well, like the Finborough. Now, admittedly, the Finborough do much larger cast shows and so on, but the Hope Theatre have, for the last 3 years, they have adhered to the Equity Fringe Agreement. If they can do it with 50 seats, I think that's an example to everybody. And one of the ways they do it is doing it exactly how I did my play at the Cock Tavern, or the play I produced at the Cock Tavern, rather, which is that they did a play just recently that I saw that's had Ian Hallard in it, who's a brilliant actor.
Mark Gatiss's
partner, yes. And it had a cast of 9 people in it. How did he put that on and pay people? He raised sponsorship to do it. So you know what? There's no God-given right to put on a show just because you're a director and want to put on a show. You have to find ways of doing it. And people who've complained to me, as we spoke earlier about the trouble with venues being overpriced, I've said to people, in that case, find a venue yourself and put it on yourself. And
found spaces. And
these people have said to me, people have come back to me and said, yeah, but they're not on the map. How would you come and review them? I said, well, the Yard wasn't on the map 4 years ago. And now they're an Arts Council funded venue, and they're definitely on the map, and critics go there.
Yeah.
There's no God-given right for critics to come to see your work either. You have to establish yourself. You have to put some hard work in. People seem to want to short circuit that. They think that because they put it on, people need to come and review it.
I think you've been really, really clear, Mark. And I'm hoping anybody listening to this that perhaps... I'm sure there are people thinking, Andrew's going to have Mark for breakfast. Well, no, because I do agree with you. I do agree. And I think what you're asking is fair. I do think it will... I think there'll be people who will pay actors less. I definitely think that. I think the generous people out there that think, no, I know it's the Finborough, but we'll pay a few £100 a week. We can get... I think some people will... I think some actors will be disadvantaged financially because of it. But I like to believe that people are at least having the conversation, and like this podcast and things, people are going to be creative about how they raise funds, even if it takes a couple of years to raise funds, where before it would rely upon the generosity
and
of
goodwill.
And goodwill.
Yeah, I'm very pleased that to have ignited the conversation. I don't think there's a ready answer to this, but I'm glad that there's a conversation being had.
Well, listeners, what do you think? Do you think actors should be paid? Well, I think I know the answer to that question. But have you got any ideas? What are some of the ideas that you have for producers and directors to go out and raise some money? So ultimately, we can all go home and we can eat. Get in touch. You can email the show, info@arian-productions.com. You can tweet the show at ShowPeopleUK using hashtag ShowPeoplePodcast. And I look forward to hearing your rants and raves.
This is Liam Tamney, and you're listening to the Show People podcast with Andrew Keats. I see you shiver with anticipation.
Well, Mark, let's start at the very beginning.
That was straight out of Rocky Horror Show, wasn't it?
It certainly was. Liam Tamney, who I know is somebody you've been championing for a long time.
Yeah.
So let's start at the very beginning. I've always wondered this. Johannesburg?
Well, you can't choose where you're born, can
you can't. But
I was born in Johannesburg a long time ago. My father's British. My mother is Polish. She was a war refugee and ended up in Johannesburg, where she met my father and married him. And my brother and I were both born in Johannesburg. It was apartheid era Johannesburg.
Yeah.
And as male white children, we would have been eligible for military service to support the apartheid regime. When in 1979, my parents decided they would move us to London, which is where we have residence rights because my father's British, so that we wouldn't have to go to military service. Of course, at this point, Johannesburg actually was, in those days, a sort of almost a fantastic city to be brought up in because it had a thriving theatre scene. And I actually discovered theatre at age 14. I was taken on a school trip to see a production of The Deep Blue Sea, Terence Rattigan's play. Little did I know then how resonant this... Well, first of all, the play is a masterpiece. But how did I know as a 14-year-old boy that its story about unrequited love would be the story of my life in many ways? but more importantly, also, which is something I didn't know at all, was that this was a play written by a gay playwright who wrote it in code about his friends. It was actually about a gay relationship, but written in code. An extraordinary play, and I remember who was in it. It was Helen Cherry, who was married to the late Trevor Howard, and an English actor called James Faulkner. They did it at a theatre called the Andre Huguenot Theatre in Hillbrow in Johannesburg. I was taken as a 14-year-old to saw this play, and overnight my life changed. I knew that that's where I wanted to be.
I've got to say, I mean, what extraordinary parents at 14 to be taken to see Rattigan. I mean, most people are lucky if they see Christopher Begins in Panto.
Yeah, no, well, actually, it wasn't my parents taking me to see that. It was the school. It was a school party.
How brilliant.
And so nowadays, when I go into the theatre, and you often go to the theatre and you see school parties there and your heart sinks, you think, oh my God, there's going to be a terrible performance and it's going to be disrupted by all the talking and eating sweets. In fact, I always remember back to the 14-year-old me, and I think there might be somebody else who's in this auditorium right now who's going to be discovered the theatre. Interestingly, a few weeks ago, I went to see Matilda open at the Curve in Leicester, and it was a school's matinee, and I thought, oh my God, this is going to be dreadful. And the audience were rapt, absolutely rapt. They were young kids and they just loved it. So yeah, I discovered theatre at the age of 14. And then 2 years later, my family emigrated to London. I remember the very first show I saw in London was the last matinee of Chorus Line at Drury Lane.
You lucky so-and-so.
1979, March the 25th, I think it might have been.
How do you do that?
And of course, coming to London, I knew my life was made because I knew that I could just go to the theatre a lot. And in short order, I did my own A-levels in London.
Yeah, I've got that here. So you did, so from 16, you went to St John's College in Johannesburg.
Yes.
And then you took your O&A levels at Albany College in London.
Yeah, which was a crammer where I could do them in a year each. I did them in a year each, a year O-levels and a year A-levels. I was quite bright in those days, which I'm not anymore.
Maybe that's where you get it from now. I've got 19 reviews. I've all got to go out tonight.
Yeah.
Maybe it comes from childhood.
So I did that really fast. And then I did that. I didn't know anything about the university system. I didn't know where to apply for, and got the UCA book, and discovered I thought that Oxbridge, you had to sit the Oxbridge exam, and I thought I haven't gone to a public school. I haven't gone through that system where I could take Oxbridge, and I was reading through prospectus for Cambridge and discovered that some colleges considered you without Oxbridge. So I applied. I applied to Corpus Christi College, Cambridge. This was during my year out. I took a year out between school and university.
Why do you do that?
Because I just thought there were other good reasons to do it, but one of the reasons was when I applied for Cambridge, you had to have a language O level, and I hadn't taken a language O level. So I already had my O and A levels in my back pocket, and Cambridge required a language O level. They also required maths O level, which I already had, a C grade on that one. But I had no French or any other foreign language, European language, but I knew a bit of Afrikaans from my childhood in South Africa. So, and there was actually an Afrikaans O level being set by one of the examining boards. So I did an Afrikaans O level during my year out.
Can you remember any Afrikaans now?
Not at all. So that was my way into Cambridge. I just had to pass my Afrikaans O level. And actually, it was really interesting. I still remember this to this day. There's two things I remember very clearly. One is that we recently found, my husband and I found the book that I applied to Corpus for, and I remember circling one bit, and it said "good for theatre."
Even then
I knew, actually, by the way, everybody I thought had law degree. Everybody would have English degrees. I thought I'll have something different and more practical.
So this is the thing I can't get, because this is what's always surprised me, because you did.
I read law
at
Cambridge, which was ridiculous. And to this day, I'm sorry I did it, because I hated it. I really didn't enjoy it at all. Very interesting. I went to a Corpus reunion a few months ago. They do these reunions every few years. And one of my contemporaries, actually somebody in the year below me, and remember, I'm not that old.
No.
One of somebody who's in the year below me, he's now Sir Nicholas, and he's a High Court judge. So
all right, well, he's a useful contact to have.
Yes,
particularly with your tweets that go out.
It was an extraordinary, but Cambridge is an extraordinary.
Is it
place.
like? I mean, is it like like Morris or the Stephen Fry books? Well, I mean, is it gorgeous and
of course
old and hugely erotic at the same time?
Not at all for me then, because first of all, it was very closeted as a university. There was in fact in my college it was me and one other gay man, and in fact somebody came out in his third year. Interesting, sad and side story to that. He was in my year, and my year was only 70 people, by the way. And my year included Hugh Bonville, who's now, of course, from Downton Abbey, Lord Grantham. In fact, it was Hugh who, I met him in my first week of college. I was in to read law, and he was reading theology. And I thought that sounds easier than law. So I changed to theology for my first year. I read theology in my first year because of Hugh.
You just wanted to get to know Hugh Bonneville. It had nothing to do with theology.
And thereafter, I went back to law because I thought that's more useful than theology. He was actually Hugh Williams in those days. But anyway, so
before the super injunction.
Yes. So we extraordinary place to be in the sense that although there's no drama department, it's a one big drama school. Yeah. So the contemporaries of my generation, I mean, Hugh was in my college, Julius Green, who's now a producer, he was in my college, and Hugh Tom Hollander was at another college, now quite a well-known actor himself, who interestingly, and by the by, a few months ago, I ran into him in a club and I looked at him and said hello, and he blanked me completely, like he didn't recognize me.
What a bitch.
And I thought, this is extraordinary. But apparently, then I read an interview with him in which he said he's very thin-skinned. And I thought somewhere along the line I must have said something to offend him. So who knows? But, and Simon Russell Beale had just left Cambridge at that point, and Tilda Swinton had just left Cambridge at that point. So it has this incredible art. Sam Mendes came up during the time I was there. So it has this incredible arts pedigree. And I worked with an extraordinary number of great people. I did lots of theatre there. I did lots of student journalism.
So I was going to ask about that. So with these extraordinary actors, did you not find yourself wanting to be on the stage and work with these people, or work with things like the Cambridge Footlights?
No, I always knew I wasn't an actor, but I did want to be a critic. Even then, I knew that. So that was something I was doing. I was doing student journalism, but I also was getting a handle on producing. So I did a lot of student producing. I produced a production of Guys and Dolls that actually Julius Green directed, and
a bit more expensive nowadays, I imagine.
Yeah. And I produced shows for Edinburgh and so on. So it was really good ground up experience.
That's amazing. And I'm going to ask, because you are very, very vocal, quite rightly, and a campaigner for LGBT rights. Listeners, I can never remember the entire LGBTIXW allies. I can't remember the full title, but let's just say LGBT, just because I'm a man of a certain age. When did you come out?
I came out as a teenager. I was when I came to move to London at 16. I knew I was gay at that point already. I think I told my mother when I was 17, and by the time I went up to Cambridge at 18, literally the month before I went to Cambridge, I was at a bar in Earl's Court, and I met the man who'd become my partner for the next 10 years.
It wasn't the Coleherne, was it?
No, it was a Harpoon Louis. Harpo's became. It's now a Wagamama's. The Wagamama's on the Earl Court Road.
Everyone likes a Wagamama's.
And we met. He was double my age, actually. I was 18. He was has been nearly 40. And we were together for 10 years, right through my undergraduate years. And he lived halfway between London and Cambridge, so it was actually very handy for when I was in Cambridge, he could come up there. When I was in London, he could go down there.
In more ways than one.
Yes, exactly. So actually, I was partnered up very, very early. And in fact, that's been a feature of my life, really, is that I've been in serial relationships. I've always been in a long-term relationship as long as I've been an adult. So I think I've had probably must be 5 major relationships, and with no disrespect to my previous partners, although the first one, Roger, he's now dead because he died of cancer at the age of 70. The first one I had, I'm now in the relationship of my life.
Yeah.
Somebody I married 5 years ago, nearly 6 years ago now, and it's now it's perfection.
I'm going to talk to Mark about what his journey would be from arriving in London and his very first jobs and experiences as a professional. But now it's time for that time of the show that I like to call Dramatic News. Today's top stories. David Haig's play Pressure will transfer into the West End in June after completing its run at the Park Theatre. The piece, which stars Haig himself as Group Captain James Stagg, follows a war room on the eve of D-Day, where the Allied commanding officers try to predict the prospect of adverse weather conditions. The production originally opened at the Royal Lyceum in Edinburgh in 2014 before transferring to Chichester Festival Theatre ahead of a national tour. It will now open at the Ambassadors Theatre, with the show's opening date being the 74th anniversary of the D-Day landings. Bat Out of Hell will extend its run in the West End at the Dominion Theatre. The musical, which is currently in previews and has an official opening later this month, will now be booking through until the 27th of October, with the new round of tickets on sale from the 19th of April. Arion Productions' very own Steve Hurst in character will return to London at the Belly Theatre as part of the Underbelly Festival 2018 for one night only on Friday the 15th of June 2018 at 9:15, directed by yours truly and produced by the same production company that brings you the Show People podcast. Steve Hurst in character is a series of 5 different characters, including Walter owner Ernie Vaz, the mayor of Kentish Town, who is a fast-talking, no-nonsense local politician and viral internet sensation, Dave Pike, former Hollywood stuntman, Lynn, a celebrity fanatic, and Queenie, an unexpected violent offender. The show has been performed in venues all over the UK, including the Astor Theatre, the Museum of Comedy, and the Tristan Bates Theatre to sell-out audiences, and follows the cinematic release of new British film Walk Like a Panther, which also stars Steve Hurst. And our final story, American Idiot will return for a UK tour next year in celebration of the Green Day musical's 10th anniversary. The tour will begin at the Grove Theatre in Dunstable on January 17th, before running at the Mayflower Theatre in Southampton. It will then tour until June 2019, visiting theatres like Sheffield Lyceum, Manchester's Palace Theatre, Cardiff New Theatre, and Brighton Theatre Royal. The show has previously run at the Arts Theatre in London, and it toured the UK in 2016. Have you got a story you'd like us to cover? Just email info@arion-productions.com.
Hi, I'm Alex from Theatre Counts. Hopefully you know by now that we are accountants for the entertainment industry. We are now officially in the new tax year. How exciting. What better time to turn over a new leaf and become uber organised this year? The jobs in our office are already starting to come in thick and fast from the usual suspects. This organised list of clients is ever growing. Completing your tax return as early as possible is the best thing that you can do. Our exciting news is very nearly ready to announce. We've been working really hard to try and make your tax lives a lot easier. We are just finalising a few finishing touches and all will be announced very soon. Follow us on Twitter @TheatreCounts to find out more. We're proud to be sponsors of the Show People podcast. If you're considering an accountant for the first time, or you're considering moving accountants, please get in touch with us for a free chat. If you are a new client to us, we will also give you a discount off your first year's fee. Just quote the Show People podcast.
do get in touch with Theatre Counts to see how they can help you save money. And don't forget to say the Show People podcast sent you, because you'll get 50 quid off your first year's fees and a free consultation with the brilliant Alex and his team.
This is West End producer, and you're listening to the Show People podcast with the sumptuous, the savoury, and the slightly sugary Andrew Keats. Dear.
So in 1986, two things happened. One, I was born, and secondly, you started your first job in London at De Winters.
Wow, so that's aging me, isn't it? Yes. So I came down from Cambridge. After graduating, I graduated in 85, and for a year I stayed on in Cambridge running the student newspaper. It's a full-time paid job. Paid very little, but it was a full-time job. And so I did that as a publishing experience, and came to London and applied to De Winters, the ad agency who specialise in West End and Broadway shows. They are the guys behind the Phantom Mask, the cat's eyes, and so on. And of course, that was a different advertising market. It was the age of print media. So they placed all the ads in the newspapers, and they designed the posters, and they'd also publish theatre programmes and souvenir brochures. I was appointed to run the publishing department. I was pretty young to do that job, but it was a fantastic introduction. The managing director of De Winters, a hugely eccentric but brilliant man called Robert De Winter, and known in the business as the Major, and he became very much a mentor for me. I think mentoring is a really important part of life, where people nurture your career, and during that time, De Winters were very big. They represent all of Cameron McIntosh's shows, all of Lloyd Webber's shows. It's when I met Cameron for the first time, met Lloyd Webber for the first time, etc., etc. And actually, we did during my time there, which was only 3 years, but when you're 25, it feels like a long time. I went on regular trips to New York, which has become a favourite city anyway, because we did brochures for Broadway shows. I remember doing the Broadway souvenir book for Carrie, which only ran 3 nights. And I remember sitting in what is now the August Wilson Theatre, was then the Virginia, with Lindsay Haitley, the 18-year-old star of Carrie, showing her photographs for approvals for the souvenir brochure.
Yeah, because it's the days of literally biking portfolios from offices, offices all over London.
Oh, I remember the very first time I sent a fax from that office, from the London office, which was in Mayfair, to New York, of a souvenir brochure insert to get approvals, and having my mind blown by the fact that you'd put this piece of paper in London and it would come out in New York.
Yeah,
it was extraordinary. Anyway, so you had to do these things in person. Nowadays, you just PDF a file over and they would look at it that way. Yeah. But it would be instant. But I would do regular trips to New York, and that actually was part of the time when my real love affair with New York began. De Winters had their own New York apartment on 6th Avenue, the Avenue of the Americas, on 6th and 37th, I remember. And I would go to New York regularly on company trips. In fact, one of my greatest regrets in life is I was once at JFK, ready to fly home, and the flight was full, and they offered me, if I agreed to stay to the next morning, a Concorde upgrade. And I had to turn down because I needed to be back in London the next morning because Cats was opening in Blackpool. And I had to be in Blackpool.
Well, I know what I would have picked.
Anyway, so it was a great intro to the business, and that's how I began my professional career. And interestingly, it was also during that time that I first met Biddy Hayward. Biddy Hayward was running the Really Useful Company at that point for Andrew Lloyd Webber. Biddy I now see every single day of my life because she's now my landlady at an office I rent in Southwark, right near my flat.
Oh, fantastic.
So this is what's so great about this business is long-term relationships and how we all interact and everything dovetails with each other. So she now runs a photo library and I rent a desk from her. So, yeah.
And interesting. So, of course, that would have been very much connected with theatre, but I suppose not from a criticism background, as perhaps your ambitions were, which is how I imagine you ended up. And again, very young. I mean, a massive achievement. Editor of Arts and Entertainment at the Press Association.
Yeah, absolutely. This was, again, I left De Winters to go there.
And probably a lot of money, I imagine.
In the end, yes. By the time I left, I was leaving. I was on a management salary, and it was much serious bucks. But the way the business worked, and I think probably still works, is it was pay the management but don't pay the staff. It was a thing where, and you know what. It was almost like a sort of apprenticeship scheme. So what they would do is get young graduates to come and work for them. It was data entry, basically.
Sounds a bit like the Fringe now, Mark.
Yes, it is. But except they were paying legal minimum wages,
sure,
but they weren't paying much more. And it was really demoralizing to run an office like that. I mean, and again, this is probably where my fair pay thing comes in, because I remember. It was brutal because I ran a staff, because I started off doing arts and entertainment, and then TV listings were deregulated during that time, because it used to be that Monopoly, Radio Times and TV Times used to run the monopoly on TV listings, and they were deregulated so that anybody could do them. And then Listings, the company I was working for, which became acquired by the Press Association, started to do TV listings under another editor. They employed another editor to do that. But I eventually became managing editor of both TV and arts and entertainment listings. And eventually I had a staff of maybe 70 or 80 people. And these were mostly young people straight out of university, and we paid them next to nothing because that's the way it was, and they got good experience, and many of them went on to national newspapers as a result. But as the years went on, it became more and more problematic for me, to the point where they relocated big chunks of the business from London to Yorkshire, which because in Yorkshire they could pay them even less. Wow. I remember we used to pay in London. This is when we were going back a long time now. 2002 is when I left. So, it's a long time ago, 15 years ago now. But when I left, we were paying London staff £12,000 a year. In Yorkshire, you could pay £7,000. So they paid them even less. And the crunch point came when they relocated the personnel department to Yorkshire as well. And the personnel department sent around a memo saying that it would be a really good idea if you could all carpool on the way to work. Because they in Yorkshire used to drive to work.
Yeah. In
London you wouldn't. But this memo went to everybody. And one of my bright young things sent a reply to this saying it would be great if management would pick us up on their way to work. By the way, I had a car parking space in central London, Victoria, and he was saying, perhaps I could pick him up on the way to work too. And I thought this was a really smart response.
Yeah.
My boss called me in and said this is a really inappropriate response and is not conducive to good company relations. And so I called this guy who subsequently worked for The Guardian. I called him in and said to him, that message you sent to the personnel department, well done.
Yeah.
You said the right thing. I then said to my boss, I've spoken to the guy concerned. She said, come and see me. I wrote my resignation letter and I went up to see her and I said, so she said, what did you say to him? I said, well done. She said, I don't think we're on the same page here. I said, no, I don't think we are.
No.
And I handed her my letter.
It sounds like the beginning of your life at that moment.
Exactly. And I just realized I had no job to go to. I had nothing to go to. And I thought, but I've got to do this. I can't live like the same. By the way, at this point as well, and this is really significant, the year before, 2001, September 11, I was sitting in my office in London watching those towers come down. I was watching it on my TV screen, and I had friends in New York. I had a friend who worked at the World Trade Center, and I was terrified for him. As it happens, by the way, he was late for work that day. He'd got to his front door. He lived in Hell's Kitchen. I used to go and stay with him all the time on the 5th floor of a building on 47th and 9th. Again, deeply symbolic because I now have an apartment myself on the 5th floor of a building in Hell's Kitchen. He got to the front door of his building and the phone rang and said, don't come down, turn your TV on. Yeah. And he hadn't gone to work that day. Anyway, and I thought life isn't a dress rehearsal. And I thought I'm going to have to leave that job anyway. And I did. Now, Julius Green, who we quoted earlier, once said to me that sometimes you have to jump out of a plane without a parachute and trust that somebody will throw you one. I jumped out of the plane without a parachute at PA. I handed my notice, and then I wrote to everybody to see if I could get work. And one of the letters I sent to was the managing editor of Northern and Shell, who owned the Sunday Express at the time. They owned the Daily Express at the time. And he replied and invited me for a drink. In fact, it turned out his motive was not entirely pure. His motive was that he was trying to leave Northern and Shell at the time, and he wanted to drill me for information on how to set up a rival to the Press Association. He's
Scandalous.
He basically wanted to set up a rival organisation that could produce TV listings, and his idea was brilliant. He thought, why not go to another English-speaking country, namely Australia, which is where he wanted to live, set up this company there, and you could charge even less to generate the stuff than PA did. And I helped him because I had no loyalty to PA at this point. And he never did it, by the way. But his payback to me was he got me in touch with the editors of the Sunday Express, and they commissioned me to write a theatre review, which was Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I remember the first show I ever reviewed, London Palladium, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And 11 years later, I was still there.
Before we get into what I think is an abhorrent, I think you were treated abominably when it came to what happened at the end of Sunday Express. But before we get to that particular point, so you find yourself in what must be a dream come true role.
Somewhat. I mean, the thing about as I said earlier, the thing about Sunday Express was that it was not in itself an income enough to live on.
No, but
it was great for status, and it was great for at the time it was great for status. I mean, subsequently the Sunday Express became a debased product that it was. I mean, I was so glad that I was gone by the time this came around, but they supported Brexit when that came around. They were also supporting UKIP at the last election. So it became, I would have been really troubled to still be working there when it happened. As it happens, the choice was not made for me. I was fired by the paper 4 years ago. And that's why, so I didn't have to make that moral choice. But yes, it was useful to have this outlet at the time. And meanwhile, I was writing for the stage. It was also during a period when you could actually multitask, and there were many more outlets. I used to write blogs for The Guardian. I used to write. I was on-call journalist for anybody who'd pay me. I was 15 years younger and had more energy. I still have a lot of energy, but I had more energy then to pursue it. Meanwhile, lots of doors have been shut in terms of journalism in the years since.
But what was it about you? Because, of course, I know that old phrase, everyone's a critic. They literally are now because of the likes of WordPress and blogging. But what was it that made people go, oh, I like his writing? Were you controversial? Were you outrageous? Were you a pleaser? What were you doing in those early days to make sure people went, we need a review of Mark Shenton? Where's that freelance guy that we use?
Yeah, I don't quite know. I mean, first of all, it's a lot of freelance working is about reliability, delivering, and being easy to work with. I think I'm both. I think I was both of those things.
I love the way you put that in the past tense.
Yeah, well, you know what? There comes a point at which you have to start drawing lines in the sand, and you stop being quite so easy and accommodating. I mean, I still think I am relatively easy to work with, but so reliability is all, but also being able to earn people's respect. I think respect is the most important quality you get. And one of the ways you earn respect is by being as honest as you can be. And the thing is that I'm absolutely a cheerleader for the theatre. I love the theatre, and that I think comes through, I hope. But at the same time, I'm not a pushover. And one of my favourite stories about the way we spoke about friendships in the theatre, the fact that I've reviewed you negatively.
Only once. All the others were 4 and 5 star, have you know?
But that's part of the thing. I mean, the fact that you have to be able to to put that to one side. And my favorite story about this, I always quote this story, is that Michael Grandage is a very good friend now, and I'm somebody I've respected I got to know him as an interviewer when I interviewed him, and in the years since we became friends. I mean, to the point that we send texts to each other. We're friends. But a couple of years ago, he did a show on Broadway called Huey that was a disaster. And on the disaster because the lead actor concerned, Forrest Whitaker, the Oscar winner, didn't learn his lines. And every single night during previews, he would go over to the water cooler to get a prompt. And so it was a hellish experience for everybody. And interestingly, Ben Brantley of the New York Times gave it a pass and loved it. So they actually, in the end, it still didn't succeed. But in the end, critically, it didn't matter that most people didn't like it because Ben Brantley did. However, I went to a press performance. You go before it opens, and 2 nights before it opened, and Michael was in the foyer, and he said, "Oh my God, we'll have to tell you one day what a trial the show has been, basically." And I said, "Well, I'm reviewing tonight," but he said, "But I can't tell you now because you're reviewing." And he said, "Let's meet later in the week." And the show opened Thursday night, and on Friday, I said, "Let's meet for lunch on Friday." So we met for lunch on Friday, and that morning he said, when we met, he said, "This morning the press agent sent the reviews around. The best were at the top, the worst were at the bottom. Yours was at the bottom." Mm-hmm. And here we were having lunch. Mm-hmm. And it also reminds me of another story that happened with Michael. Another time in London, we were having lunch, and the night before, one of Ken Branagh's shows had opened, The Entertainer, at the Garrick. And Rob Ashford, who's a friend of Michael's and somebody I know very well, directed it. And Rob Michael came to meet me straight from seeing Rob. And actually, I liked that production of The Entertainer. Not many people did, but
I'll keep my opinion to myself on that one.
But actually, I did. And Michael Kay arrived and said, "Rob thanks you for your review of The Entertainer." And I said to him, "No, but he wouldn't have." I said, "Thank you, but he wouldn't have thanked me for the previous review of Romeo and Juliet." And Michael said, and this is so brilliant, he said, "Yes, and that's why he knows that your review of The Entertainer is authentic, because you don't just give him a pass."
Absolutely. Do you know what it's like, Mark? I've just applying it to sort of a director's point of view. It's funny how many actors can hate directors because they haven't necessarily given them a job.
Yeah.
But like when an actor comes into audition, I have absolutely no desire whatsoever to waste 15 minutes or half an hour of my life interviewing someone that's terrible, that's wrong for the part. I long for a fabulous actor to walk through the doors. And when they're there, then they get the job, or I end up having a fight with the producer about who we get because of the passion of loving something. It's not like, I think sometimes with critics, with you guys, I think some people think, oh, they came up with all those lines before they even sat down, and they just wanted to put the knife in.
Well, you've posted one earlier where the person had rehearsed the lines beforehand.
But you know what? But I mean, it's not like you think, that'll teach them. Like I've been to the theatre with you, and you know it's got to the interview, and I've looked at you and said, "This is brilliant," and you've said, "Talk to me after," and then afterwards you quiet or whatever, and you've clearly been moved to your core. Last
night I saw The Inheritance at the Young Vic, and literally at the end of Act 1 I was sobbing. I was literally sobbing, and it was excruciatingly beautiful and wonderful. So yeah, I mean, I do bring up a lot of emotion to the theatre, and that's why I don't think it can be truly objective, because I think you if you're an emotional person, you bring yourself to the play.
But that's art. That's how art works.
Yes. So exactly. You have to bring yourself to it. Yeah. I mean, another couple I met last night, straight couple, he said they're in their 80s, and they were watching The Inheritance, and he said, "This is a foreign land to me." He said he doesn't understand the experiences being described in the play were remote to him. He's loved the production, but he didn't relate to it in the same way. That's a play that's very personal for any of us who've lived through HIV/AIDS, and the play is about the generation we lost in between, and actually I have lost friends, and in fact somebody who I was at university in my year in my college, it was an early person who died of an HIV-related illness. Well, you've always been a great champion of the part of my life that I didn't expect to be there, whether that be championing as is, to the campaigning and things. So thank you, and indeed in your own ways. Again, it's there are issues that you have brought to attention that I think
people haven't considered. What I do want to ask is musical theatre and where your love of musical theatre came from.
Right. Well,
Around about this time, was it? Or...
no, musical theatre was when growing up in South Africa early on. I discovered musicals early on. I discovered them partly through cast albums. I said to you that Chorus Line was the first show I saw in London when I arrived in London in 1979. I already knew the cast album inside out, having bought it in Johannesburg. So this is a show that I knew intimately from that. I'd also seen in Johannesburg productions of Pippin, which remains a favourite show, Annie, which also is another favourite show.
You like Annie?
Oh, yes.
Never.
Oh, it's a hard knock life. What a song.
Bring yourself to a song. Yeah.
And I remember in London early on, I discovering Sondheim through Side by Sondheim on the albums, and then seeing Sweeney Todd at Drury Lane, the original production in 1980 with Sheila Hancock and Dennis Quilley. And realizing, having that epiphany moment that Sondheim is probably the greatest musical dramatist of our...
Closest thing I know to God.
Yeah. And then, of course, the original production of The Hired Man at the Astoria in 1984, before you were born.
Yes, but I know about Claire Burt and Paul Clarkson and...
Yes.
And
yeah.
Anyway.
One of the great British musicals of our time. So I fell in love with musicals early on, and that remains a major passion of mine to this day. Having said all of that, what's interesting is that I work to music because I have to have something on. I do not play musicals as background because I have to listen to them. So guess what my program of choice is to listen to in the background?
Howard Goodall's choral music?
Often, yes. But that's my treat music. If I'm feeling particularly depressed, I always play his music. And then at least once a week. I play Bend It Like Beckham every week. I play his choral music frequently. But I actually play Classic FM, where he has been composer in residence.
Yeah.
And they often will be playing Howard Goodall songs.
My problem with Classic FM is all it takes is something by Mahler, for example. I'll be in the worst mood imaginable because you get so affected by it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I need to put something on in the background like Prime Minister's Questions, because I can phase that out. But if you put on a beautiful Requiem or something, I'll just be sat there, defeated.
Hello, this is Kim Ismay, and you're listening to the Show People podcast with Andrew Keats, and I hope you're having a wickedly interesting time.
It's time for the Show People podcast platform, the part of the show where we give some well-earned exposure to a playwright, composer or artist to share their work with our listeners. And today's platform is given to a new musical called Island Song, which has just played at the Tristan Bates Theatre for a few performances before transferring to the Nursery Theatre from the 12th to the 16th of April 2018. 5 New Yorkers are caught in a twisted love affair with their city. Every character in this piece struggles and faces significant emotional challenges, but they are never going to give in. From the career girl with a dysfunctional love affair between the city and a guy, to the struggling actor who moves to the city for his big break. All 5 are optimists. That's why they struggle, and that's why they continue to face the challenges that come at them every single day. Sound familiar? Driven by its kinetic and evocative score, Island Song will capture your heart, drawing you into the rhythm of the city. This will be the first UK professional production of Island Song, and the Hidden Theatre Company can't wait to share it with you. This actual recording comes from their rehearsal room, so it might not be a fancy studio recording as such, but it's really wonderful to hear what's going on in our rehearsal spaces in London. With words by Sam Carner, music by Derek Gregor, and story by Sam Carner, Derek Gregor, and Marlo Hunter, this song features their full company. Here's So Many Different Windows from Island Song.
So many different windows are lit up tonight. So many people walking on the street below. How many other lives are somewhere in my sight? Now so many windows there, and maybe there are some I'll come to know. So many different paths that just might intersect. Some wish on stars, I wish on windows. And as I say, please, how could I expect now?
guys. For more information about Island Song and to get your tickets, visit thehiddentheatrecompany.com. You can also follow them on Twitter at Hidden Theatre Co. and at Island Song LDN. Are you a writer, a composer, or an artist who creates original work that would like your work played on the Show People podcast? Well, please get in touch. It doesn't matter if you've got an iPhone and you can record your rehearsal room or whether you've got a professional demo. All I care about is that the work is new and that you can give us permission to play it to our listeners. If you want to send me something, just send it to info@arian-productions.com, as we really are passionate about new work and new writers.
This is Bill Deemer, and you're listening to the Show People podcast with Andrew Keats.
I'm going to ask now, because I know there was lots of coverage about it, but to hear you talk about it is very different to what you would have then had, which is blogs, which is what I think is the unfair laying off from the Sunday Express.
I did actually write about it on my blog.
I have got it here.
The day after they fired me, I wrote about it on the stage. And interestingly, one of the things that I had no idea that I was doing it, in fact, but it turns out that I was doing the right thing, which is that John Ronson wrote a brilliant book about internet shaming. And of course, this happens more and more now, but where you get publicly vilified for something you've said or done in your past. And
it's happening more and more.
And one of the things he says in the book is that you have to own the narrative. So you take charge of the narrative. I had no idea I was doing this, but the day after they fired me, I thought I'm not embarrassed by this, and I'm going to go public with why they fired me. And that was owning the narrative. The circumstances, which are very public, and in fact, even on my wiki page, they do refer to it. I didn't write my wiki page, I hasten to add. They talk. What happened was that this was 2013 that I was fired. What had happened was that. A reader, supposedly, quotes, had written to them to alert them to the fact that there existed online some naked pictures of me. They were actually on a website, which I'm not going to name here because I don't want to drive traffic there.
Got thousands of people off to go and see
to go and find it, yes. But actually, what was interesting was it was behind a paywall. So you wouldn't just stumble upon this website by accident.
But why? Let's just stop, because I have got the quote here, and I can hear your tone and the sadness. This is very weird. When we arrived, from what we were talking about earlier, but when we arrived, getting all of the bits and pieces in your flat, getting my stuff in through the corridor, something fell off the floor of your bookcase, and it was Jumpers for Goalposts. And in this column, you say, after 11 and a half years as theatre critic for the Sunday Express, which began with a review of the opening of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang at the London Palladium in May 2002, and ended with a column that included an instant gay theatre classic in Jumpers for Goalposts at the Bush last Sunday. I have been laid off.
That's absolutely uncanny that script fell on the floor as we came in here. That's a higher power.
That's very strange.
Exactly. No, absolutely. It was symbolic.
That absolutely did happen.
Yes.
How
spooky. So just to recap, so people don't go searching for the blog column, etc., and because I'm not embarrassed about this, and actually in many ways it changed my life, which I'll also freely talk about in a minute. But what happened was these pictures, these old pictures, surfaced, and I know for 99.999% fact that it was an ex-partner who alerted them to it. So there were these pictures in this magazine that had been put online. I didn't know that they'd ended up online. I didn't know. I didn't know they'd end up in a magazine. They were taken as part of a. I remember where they were taken, and I can obviously remember why they were taken too, because and I can even date them actually, because they were taken in San Francisco. I was there for a bear convention, which is a meeting of large hairy men, and I, of course, everything in my life has a theatre reference, and I remember on that trip seeing the pre-Broadway tryout of a play called Wrong Mountain. So this was 1999.
Yeah.
that these pictures were taken. And they were taken as part of a sex date. And the guy that took them ended up, he used to do these pictures because he liked bigger men. And he gave them to a website that likes bigger men. Now, it's a very niche market. There are porn comes in all sorts of varieties, and some people like this stuff. And guess what? I think now, with hindsight, a lot of that was for me a search for validation. But more interestingly, and this is the thing which I'm very happy to talk about, is that a friend who's an actor 3.5 or 4 years ago asked me why those pictures existed. And it's a question I never asked myself until then. And he was leading me somewhere, and they were taken as part of a sex date, as I say. But why would I have allowed that to happen? And I said, as I just said, validation was part of it. But also he made me see that I was indulging in a pattern of behavior at the time that could be called sex addiction. And there is, and I absolutely was. I mean, I know now that I know the label and I know where this comes from. And he led me to a fellowship, a 12-step fellowship that deals with sex addiction. Just as there are 12-step programs that deal with alcohol addiction and drug addiction and overeating addiction and shoplifting addictions and so on. Anyway, cut a long story short, I joined that fellowship for 3.5 years ago. In July, in the summer of that year. This is after the Sun Express had fired me. So 7 or 8 months after the Sun Express had fired me, I joined this fellowship. And I'd been in a 21-month depression the Sun Express firing me didn't lead to the depression. I was already depressed. I've suffered depressions all my life, literally all my life. And I was in another depression at the time. The Sun Express fired me. The depression, I think, got extended by the firing because I was going to come out of it as long as this terrible thing had happened to me. But I joined this fellowship, and 6 months in...
Just on that, Mark, I mean, with all of what must have felt like every wall tumbling down in your privacy,
yeah.
I mean...
It felt like the end of the world. It did feel like the end of the world.
And did you get to a point where you thought, fuck this, I just want to run myself a long bath,
Yeah, I did very much so. Luckily, I had the incredible support of my husband, which was great. And also, by the way, by going public, as I did the day after they did this, I got incredible industry support immediately. And that was very validating and very supportive because, as you say, what was the big deal? Everybody's got naked pictures out there now, thanks to Grindr and Scruff and things like that. Interestingly, I've never been on those sites, and thank God not, given my addictions. But
what a temptation to resist.
Absolutely.
Because it's now the norm. I think
absolutely. And I do think that in the gay lifestyle, sex addiction is normalized. And we celebrate it. We think that it's absolutely the right thing to get as much as you can. What I'd never realized that that's what I was suffering from. I never realized that. I joined this fellowship 6 months into joining the fellowship, Christmas of 2013. I'm in a meeting in New York, and by the way the 12-step fellowships work is it's self-help through fellow addicts. So it's not professionally run; it's run by people who also suffer the addiction. And I went to meetings every single day for a month because I was in New York for a month. And I even went on Christmas Day. I remember this so vividly.
Mark.
And in the middle of them, and it was in those meetings that I felt my depression lift. Oh. That was three Christmases ago. It has not come back to this day. And this is the longest period I've ever been depression free in my life.
Really?
I've always had depressions every 12 to 18 months. I've had a cycle of depression. There are meetings in London every single day. There's one place that has meetings 5 times a day.
Did you feel less lonely when you saw other people going through? That's
the first thing. You realize you're not the only person. But as I say, because what it works, the way 12 Steps works is it works on a very spiritual level. A lot of people have a problem with this spiritual level, but I'm here to reassure you that it doesn't involve God. It's called
no Sondheim involved on this call.
It's called. There's a lot of reference to a higher power freeing you of your addiction. Now, for a lot of people, that might be God. But the higher power can be of your definition, whatever your definition of higher power is. And for me, the higher power is the room itself, the people in that room. And that sense of community you get among fellow addicts. And I mean, in New York, I love the New York meetings. I still go to the New York meetings every time I'm in New York. There's between 20 and 25 people in those meetings, which feels kind of containable. And whereas the London meetings that I've been to, there's a group that meets in London that you can get 40 to 50 people in a meeting, and that's overwhelming. I actually now co-chair a meeting that happens every Friday in London, and that's between 10 and 15 people usually, although we are growing. I mean, because you don't know how many people are going to come to any of these meetings.
And I suppose how many people don't necessarily realise that they've got that as a problem,
No.
or indeed, what would you Google? Sex addiction is a great term when you've heard the term sex addict.
Yes.
Before then,
yes.
you just feel like you're perverse, or you've got these.
And actually, the interesting
persuasions.
thing about the fellowship I belong to is it's sex and love addicts. And actually, one of the things I've realised is that every relationship I've been to has been a love addiction as well as a sex addiction. So I've always counted on a partner to fulfill me, to complete me, to rescue me. One of the characteristics of sex and love addiction is the need to rescue or be rescued. And I think many of us have been there. And in fact, there's a document that we read out at every meeting called The Characteristics of Sex and Love Addiction. There are 12 bullet points on this. And those aren't the 12 steps, but 12 characteristics, 12 things that if you tick these, then you might be a sex and love addict. I think I can tick every single one. Anyway.
From the way you're describing, I'm thinking to myself, do you know, I bet I probably can too. And and do you know what? A lot of gay men.
Now, as I say, I'm very happy to talk publicly about this, although we don't like to identify the fellowship in the media as such. But one of the 12th step of 12 steps, the first one is admitting you have the problem and that you're powerless over it, and there are various other ones. But the 12th step is that having had an awakening as a result of these steps, you carry the message to other addicts, and that's a key part of it, actually, which is that that's why I talk about it, because I've talked to many friends about it, and I've seen the light bulb go off in their eyes, and they then joined the fellowship. And the idea that somebody saved my life by introducing me to the fellowship, that I can in turn introduce people to the fellowship, is an inspiring thing to be able to do.
What's really interesting as well, and I know with an interview, it's first 20 minutes, everyone's always quite anxious. Oh, what's the sound like? Da-da-da-da-da-da. But just seeing you go to that place of talking about those people you've been with, you've got this amazing sense of calm about you. Just this amazing sort of, there's clearly things that happen in that room, the room where it happens.
Yes, no, it really is. It really is. I mean, the room where we met in the meeting I run, or co-chair, I think is the phrase. The brilliant thing that it takes place in a church, and it's the most incredible spiritual space. Not just because it's in a church, but there's just a sense of
great architecture.
We are now having to move spaces, and actually I've actually found a new room for us to go to. I don't know if it's going to have the same spiritual energy, but I suspect it will, because
Is it a theatre?
It is, actually.
You were going to say that. But it will be for you then.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so there, to talk about addictions, I mean, here I am. I'm an addict, and I'm going to take my meetings to a theatre. It's it's an incredible thing. It really is. And I did something incredible, I think, for me. About a year into my recovery, I wrote a letter to the editor of the Sunday Express, thanking him for what had happened to me, because of that, I was led to the fellowship, and because of the fellowship, I've been taken out of my depression. That's the biggest gift I could imagine. And addicts often talk about gratitude, and one of the things that we learn to do is to be grateful for our addictions, and I'm actually profoundly grateful that I've now unlocked the source of my problem in addiction, and actually in so many ways, my entire life is not just the relationships I've had because of the love addictions that I've been in these terrible relationships often with, but more to the point, I've also found I think the 12 Steps program is a program for life, not just for addiction.
And none of us arrive on this planet with a manual.
And this is a manual. This does provide you with a manual. It's incredible. And it's only 12 steps to get there.
Not easier than the Bible.
Absolutely. And so therefore, so I wrote to the editor, thanked him for leading me there. And it's a gift. It really is a gift.
Hi, this is David Bedella, and you're listening to the Show People podcast with Andrew Keats.
So on to very, very happy subjects. There is... I think my favourite photographs I've seen of you, one is of your fabulous wedding cake, and the other is of you and your wonderful husband getting married. So tell me a little bit about Mark and more of your personal stuff.
Yeah, Mark is a civilian. He's a normal person, as I often say. People always come up to him at theatres and say, "Oh, are you in the business?" To which the assumption that he must be in the business because he's with me, he always responds, "Yes, I'm Hugh Jackman's body double." But no, I always say no, he's a normal person, and he's an IT specialist. And we met nearly 10 years ago. We married 5 years ago. In New York, and he enjoys the theatre but does not love it in the way that I do. So I'm now very, very particular about which shows I take him to. I only take him to shows that I think he's going to like.
He has to go, almost get the proper Shenton seal of approval of, no, you have to come and see this.
Yes.
A couple of mine I've been lucky enough to say, I'm coming back and I'm bringing Mark, and you go, God, I really did like it.
And that often happens. I will go and see something and then I know I need to take him again. I mean, right now, last night, I came out of the first show of The Inheritance and I went online and to see when I could get tickets to see it again to take him.
And the other thing as well, because as well as your, I don't want to say struggles with mental health, but your challenges with mental health and how you've overcome them, you've also had some quite severe health conditions and health scares with your back and your hip.
And heart last summer.
And heart, which was I was going to get on to.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? Life ain't a dress rehearsal, and this is one of the things we've discovered. Yeah, I have had wrestled with some bad health. I spoke earlier about the fact that I have a genetic predisposition to a bad back. Many people have bad backs. This is not abnormal. My brother, who's a marathon runner, he's exactly the same problem as me. So I've had back surgery several times. I'm still not out of the woods on that one. I don't think it's helped by sitting in terrible theatre seats several nights a week. But you know what? But to be honest, as much as I have been in physical pain from my back and hips, I've had both hips replaced as well, that is nothing compared to mental pain. No. Suffering depressions, which I think I remembered my first depression when I was about 14 or 15. And I've suffered depressions literally all my life until recently, as we spoke about earlier. And I've done, all the talking therapies, et cetera, that you can think of. I've also done the medication routes. To be honest, I'm still to this day, and I will continue to be for the rest of my life now. I'm on a low dosage of citalopram, which is an antidepressive, and because I just want to keep it in my bloodstream because I don't know if it works or not, but what's the harm in taking a daily tablet? So I do that too. But as I say, I'm now depression-free for 3 years. I don't want to tempt Providence by saying that, but the good news is that I have found, I think maybe one of the reasons for why I've suffered depression all my life. Mm-hmm. And that's, to be honest, one of the things about addictions, and we've spoken about them at some length now already, but one of the things about addictions is it's whatever the addiction, whatever your addictive, your vice of choice might be, whether it's drink or drugs or sex.
Or all of the above.
Or sex, all of them, is that it's anesthetizing pain. Yeah. And you have to find out where the pain has come from first before you can get rid of it. So for me, I've used porn, I've used sex, I've used all those things to anesthetize pain, and now I know where that comes from. And so it's opened my eyes.
That's inspiring. Oh my God! And I think there are many. I'm sure many women as well, but there are certainly when it comes to men's mental health, which I do believe that there's a great book. You've probably read it. Have you come across Matthew Todd's Straitjacket?
Yes, I have, absolutely. And how gay men, I mean, Matthew's a friend, I know him well.
Isn't it extraordinary?
That many gay men suffer disproportionately mental health issues, but to do with, and this was a lot of it's tied in with sex addiction, actually. I think is a key
That's why
factor
when you
of
were
it.
talking, I was thinking, this all sounds very much like Matthew's book.
Yeah, because we're anaesthetising pain with that.
Hello, this is Steve First, and you are listening to the Show People podcast with Andrew Keats. A man so marvellous, he's putting bums on seats. Whether it be parakeets eating halal meats or premier athletes submitting VAT receipts. It's the Show People podcast with Andrew Keats.
So it's time for my favourite things, which is where I ask my guests to, I would normally ask my guests to imagine that they are on tour, stranded in Whitley Bay. But I'm very sad to say that we have had our very first ever Show People podcast complaint. Yes, Sam Lupton writes in, "Oi, stop slagging off Whitley Bay in your podcast. The Bay is a lovely place. Why don't you slag off Rill? It's an utter shithole. So we're going to strand you instead in Rill, in your digs. You already have a copy of the Bible and the complete works of William Shakespeare. I want to know, what would be the album you take with you?"
That's really, really hard.
You also get musical later, so you can go with the two slightly different ones there. You also get film as well.
Well, I have to have several of all of them. I mean, it was which Howard Goodall show would I choose? I listen to Bended Like Beckham every single week, so probably Bended Like Beckham is the album.
And the film?
And the film, New York, because that gives me Liza Minnelli in one of her greatest performances, and I love that film. I just love it.
And the book?
I couldn't choose. How do you choose one? A bit like the Carrington Avenue Q who wants to retire to his to read his Broadway musicals book.
The A to Z of Broadway musicals.
A to Z of Broadway musicals. Probably the book that I need to write, actually.
I was going to say, because you've done
I did a theatre guide
Yeah,
once.
I
upon a
found
time.
that on Wikipedia.
Yeah, but no, I need to do it. I probably do need to write the book of Broadway musicals. Although there are many books already on that subject, but there's no truly definitive one.
There's not one that's written with a voice that's nice to read.
Yes.
What's the play?
The play is The Deep Blue Sea, which is the play that I discovered as a child, as a teenager, and has become the play of my life. I think it has made so much sense of so much of my life. We didn't talk actually about my passion for New York, but you wanted to abandon me in New York instead. Because in
the middle of Times Square,
a city I love so much that my husband and I bought an apartment there 6 years ago, and I now find no excuse not to go there.
And what would be the musical?
I really said I'm going to take Bend Like Beckham as my album, but I love that score. But the score that the show that I love most, the greatest musical ever written, in my opinion, is in Guys and Dolls.
I knew you were going to say Guys and Dolls.
It's an extraordinary musical, and I think I'd have to take that with me.
And finally, what would be your luxury item?
Apart from you.
Apart from me, I'll be there just to help carry your bags.
Yes. Oh gosh, that's really stumped me. I'm an addict in so many ways. I'm addicted to my iPhone. Am I allowed to have an iPhone?
You can have your iPhone.
Yes.
Just to piss everyone off back in the UK whilst you're living your days out. Well, it's now time for the final part of the show, which is everyone's favourite part of the show, which is Funny 5 Minutes. Mark Shenton, you must answer as many of the questions I'm about to ask you as quickly as possible within 5 minutes. Mark Shenton, let's play Funny 5 Minutes. Mark Shenton, if you were a superhero, what would be your superpower?
This is going to be a very long 5 minutes, isn't it?
Well, it's more like 4.5 or 3.5.
Okay. Superpower, curing HIV.
That would be a nice superpower. I'll have some of that. What's your favourite sport?
Sofa surf.
Sofa surf.
Sofa surfing.
And what's the strangest place you've ever had a wee?
Gosh, you're asking these impossible questions.
Outrageous questions.
a sex club in New York where people enjoy that sort of thing.
What is... Oh, Star Trek or Star Wars?
I don't watch either, but neither.
That's neither. If someone narrated your life, who would it be?
Narrated my life as a treat to my husband, Simon Russell Beale.
I thought you were going to say West End producer then. What are the best kind of pants?
2X.
If you had to choose your last meal, what would it be?
Turkish Delight chocolate.
Who was your teenage crush?
Mel Gibson was a big
Mel
thrup.
Gibson. Yeah. That's probably changed over the years.
It has.
What is your favourite television show right now?
We don't watch anything current because we only do catch up. So Breaking Bad is what we're catching up on now.
Amazing choice. What is the strangest thing you've ever had in your mouth?
These are salacious questions.
They certainly are. You're going to go back and listen to what everybody else has been saying.
Yes. I'm going to pass on that one.
That's a natural pass. Would you like to swim with sharks?
Would I like to swim with sharks? Yes.
Yes. If there was an autobiography about you, what would it be called?
I love the Howard Goodall musical, In Dark Rooms.
In Dark Rooms, Mark Shenton. Mark, as ever, thank you for being just totally game and actually being so honest about so many things. Sadly, that noise tells me that is the end of the show. But before we go, I just want to squeeze in a couple of parish notices. Firstly, a big thank you to everyone involved in Island Song for sending in a clip for their rehearsal. Good luck with your run at the Nursery Theatre, and thank you to our sponsors, Theatre Cans, for supporting the show. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding for the one, the only, Mr. Mark Shenton. Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, this has been a pleasure.
How can people keep up to date with all that you're up to if they don't follow you already?
Well, Twitter is Shenton Stage, at Shenton Stage. My podcast is Commit to No Nuisance with Carl Woodward. Search for Commit to No Nuisance on online.
And it's on iTunes, listeners, as well.
Yeah. And also my own personal website is shentonstage.com. And also you can read me on the stage and londontheatre.co.uk.
Make sure you give Mark Shenton and the Hidden Theatre Company a follow on Twitter. And again, you can find out all of the links and details about them on our show notes. This podcast is produced by Arian Productions Limited, dedicated to giving opportunities to theatre makers. If you can support the work we do, then please become a friend of Arian by making a donation to help fund this free podcast, as well as the shows, masterclasses, and more in 2018 and beyond. Just visit www.arian-productions.com/donate. I'm sure you've got a couple of minutes after this to just pop on your iPhone, give us a tenner, and that'll really, really make a difference. Have you got a little space in your pencil case, or are you partial to a brew? Then you need to get your hands on our brand new Show People podcast mugs and pens. All profits go towards covering the cost of the Show People podcast, as well as future productions by Arian Productions. Get yours immediately after listening by visiting www.arianproductions.com/shop. Go on, treat yourself. We are attracting over 1,000 downloads every single month. If you love the show, if you can't afford to make a donation, if you don't really fancy a Show People podcast mug, well, heck, why not just go to our iTunes page and leave us a review, as that too really helps with those magical Apple algorithms. Finally, don't forget you can also join the Show People Podcast Listeners Forum at facebook.com/Show People Podcast. I've been Andrew Keats. You've been listening to the Show People Podcast. Just be better.
And I had to turn down because I needed to be back in London the next morning because Cats was opening in Blackpool.